I'm eager for us to press into what the Lord is really looking to kind of stir up inside of us and build within us this morning, especially as we just kind of turn our attention to the cross and turn our attention to the empty grave of what Christ did thousands of years ago. I'm grateful for many of you who are joining us online this morning. Really what an honor it is to have you tuning in with us. I'd love for you to take a moment and share this video. Let's work together, continue to spread the gospel just as one body and one people. But church, I love that video as I've been thinking about it this week, that there really is no other king like Jesus. No other king who created the universe, who created all of time, who created the galaxies and the stars and the Milky Way, all of what we see on a clear night sky when we're out in the backyard looking up. The moon, the solar system we're in, the planet we're on. No other king has created all of that and then yet chose in all of his power and all of his authority to step into it. Like an adult man trying to put on his little boy's T-ball uniform. No king has ever tried to has ever been able to be in comparison to Christ. As Christ stepped into time, stepped into this world that he made, he also didn't come as some king over a region. He didn't come born in a palace or born into wealth. He was born into poverty, right? He was born into a very low income family. And even throughout some parts of his life, he was homeless even. He didn't wear robes. He didn't ride around on stallions or with any kind of fancy carriages or chariots, anything like that. No, he would walk in dirty sandals that would fall apart at the laces. As he went throughout his life, he loved the unlovable. He loved people so well that it irritated those who were in power and those who were in authority. He stood up to the proud and the arrogant. He stood up for people who didn't have the strength or even the self-esteem to stand up for themselves. And he even throughout his days, even though he was God in the flesh, fully God, fully man, stepping into the world, he still brought imperfect men. He still brought fishermen and tax collectors. He still brought these people who were uneducated, who had no GED or any diploma, anything like that. He brought them around and he brought them together as friends. And the entire time he knew that there'd be a day where one of them would sell him out. He knew that one of them one day would put a little money in his pocket if he could make up some lies and turn him in. And he knew that all these guys who he brought in and opened himself up to as brothers would all run away from him. He knew that as he rode in as a donkey, we celebrated this last week, as he rode into the city of Jerusalem on a donkey, he knew all the people who'd be waving palm branches and laying them down would soon be raising up their hands and rejecting him, saying, we want nothing to do with him. This king who wasn't given a crown of jewels or gold, but was given a crown of thorns. One who wasn't respected or elevated, but was spit on and mocked. And even his own executioners, that they had a plan, right? For them, it was them stomping out the campfire, right? It was them taking the candle and blowing out the flame. But they had no idea that their very doing is actually fulfilling the very work that Christ set out to do. They were actually aiding him in his destruction and his tearing down of the kingdom of darkness that has been controlling people, that has been in this world. And he's been coming in and bringing his light. They thought they were blowing it out, but actually they were kind of turning up the flame. And so when Christ took his last breath, he laid in the grave for several days, and then he rose, proving he was God, proving that he was more than just a man. Understand that he died to prove that he was human, and he rose from the grave to prove that he was God, which is essential. I mean, for those of us who really enjoy talking through theology and the hard parts of our faith, right, understand this is a pivotal moment, right, in our understanding of who Christ is. He proved who he was. He defeated death. He tore down the stronghold of darkness, and through it, right, he brought about this opportunity for salvation to the world where a wall stood, right? Where a wall stood between God and humanity. Christ busted out a door frame. That way, every individual person, as the veil was torn, right, that every individual person for themselves could decide, you know what, aside from all the ceremonial laws, aside from trying to live up to this, all of these ceremonies in the Old Testament of trying to kind of climb the ladder to work my way to God, which all throughout the Old Testament we see how God created the ladder not to show that people were good enough to get it, but to show that they couldn't get to him. And Christ tore the veil, right? The veil was torn that day to push that all aside. That way humanity could grab a hold of the doorknob if they so chose. And to walk through. And to know the Creator who put on his son's T-ball outfit. That we could be with him. And this whole week as my heart has been preparing for today, as my mind, and I've just spending time with God saying, Lord, Lord, show us. As we spend time celebrating this moment in history, what you've done for humanity, how you changed the world, what is it perhaps that you want to remind us of? Because it blows my mind that a year ago, right, that we didn't gather in this kind of way to celebrate Easter. I was talking with Chris about this a little bit ago. That we didn't gather like this for Easter. As the world was flipped upside down. And not just the world, but our own homes, right? We're flipped upside down. And we saw how darkness, we saw how sin kind of crept in. And we saw how our marriages really kind of were ripped at the seams. We saw how our teenagers really rebelled and drove us insane. We saw how our already bad relationship with our adult children got even worse. And so we saw all of this darkness grab a hold of people. And it made our hearts just ache. And even this last week in our own church, we've seen such loss and heartache as we've lost one of our own, as several of our church family right now are watching this in a hospital bedroom. I mean, multiple of you right now cannot be here because you're there. And this is a tough week. And so I'm praying, Lord, what do you want to show us? Because it's easy, right? It's easy for us, church, to become so familiar with something but barely know it. It's so easy if we eat the same food all of the time for it to lose its taste. It's so easy for us, especially if we've grown up in church and this is the millionth Easter we've celebrated. This is the millionth time we've talked about this. That it can just be, all right, come on, let's just get on to what's next. For some of us, we've maybe need some awakening of why we celebrate this and what's so significant. That we can kind of stir up some flames again with our walk with Christ. Because we're missing out on so much of what God is inviting us to when it means to follow him. So much of what our relationship means. I remember when Aaron and I first got married, the day we got married. We were young, crazy, excited to get married. And I remember that day, I remember seeing Erin for the first time and seeing her walk in and just, oh my goodness, just beauty, right? Almost wanted to cry. I mean, like, oh my word, that's my bride, right? Even now today, I love looking at our pictures and I love watching our wedding video just to be reminded of, oh my goodness, she is so gorgeous and she has been just as gorgeous every single day. Right? Yes. Yeah. Okay. She's been just as gorgeous every single day. Right, gentlemen? Yes. Of course, we say that about our bride, even in the morning when their breath stinks. Right? Yes. We just as beautiful. And I laugh whenever I look at those pictures and I see myself as this young kid who, oh my goodness, who didn't even have the common sense to get a haircut that day. And who rented a suit that was way too big. I mean, literally, I looked like a guy who just kind of moseyed his way into the wedding. And it looks like Aaron stood on the stage marrying a baby elephant as I stood there in a gray suit. Oh, but I remember as we went through our ceremony, became husband and wife, and went went off. We didn't leave for our honeymoon until Monday morning because the Sunday after, Aaron's side of the family had this huge family reunion at her grandparents' house, and they lived on the lake. And so we went over there, and I remember, we're having a great time together, coming into this family reunion now. I'm a part of the family. Right now, I'm a son-in-law, right? All those things. And I remember being there, and I remember everyone's, all right, time to head out to the lake, get on the boat, go skiing, all that stuff. And so Aaron and I went to go get changed into our bathing suits, and she, got her swimsuit, went to the bathroom, she got changed, and she came out, and then I got mine, walked in, and got changed, and it was funny. As I opened the door walking out, we started to look at each other and laugh because I'm like, oh my goodness, we're married now. Like, it's okay if we get changed in the same room at the same time now. It's okay, right? But we didn't even think of it. So we laugh about that even now till today, but we think of our walk with God. We celebrate what he did on the cross. We celebrate he's alive, right? We have these sayings, these phrases that we shout even in church, all these things maybe you've heard all throughout your years, but we forget the true depth of what Christ brought about, especially in the essence of being in a relationship with him. Now it's so easy. And there's a moment that day when Christ is being nailed to the cross that I believe the Lord wants to use to remind us this morning. You see, as his executioners, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all these religious leaders were getting everything organized. And they had Christ carry his cross up onto this hill. And as he was being nailed to it, he wasn't the only one. There were actually two people who that same day were being crucified with him. And it's in Luke chapter 23 that we read about this moment. And I'd love if you have a Bible to open it up and read it with me, if you do your version app on your phone or want to follow along here on the screen. But there's this moment that we don't necessarily hear a lot about in the other Gospels, but Luke spends a good bit of his time talking about. And there's something extremely significant that I believe God wants our hearts to receive this morning. So we're going to start reading in verse 32. It says, 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called Skull, they crucified him there along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, he saved others. Let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one. The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. And there was a written notice above him which read, this is the king of the Jews. One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other criminal rebuked him. Don't you fear God, he said, since you are under the same sentence. We are being punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said to Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus answered him, truly I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise. I am always amazed as I read through this story, and I read how the religious leaders, all the people, the audience there, were standing and watching and shouting, if you're really God, why don't you just save yourself? And even the guards there who are a little bit closer, right? So it starts at the audience that moves a little bit closer. Even the guards who are there, keeping the audience at bay, or the crowd at bay, yet still kind of being there and carrying out the crucifixion. Even they say, you know what, if you're really king, then why don't you save yourself? right? Why don't you hurry up and just jump down from there? Why don't you show us all who you are? Why don't you just save yourself? If that's really who you claim to be. And then even one of the criminals, even one of them speaks up and says, yeah, you know what? If you were really God, you would save yourself and you save me while you're at it. I wonder if that criminal especially had some kind of awareness of who Jesus was before that moment. I would guess he did. I would guess that he knew and at least heard about Christ. He heard about him feeding thousands of people. He heard the stories of him casting out demons. He heard the stories of him calming storms. He heard the stories of him doing all of these things. And I wonder if in that moment he even, as he was hurling insults at Christ in his last moments, as he knows that he's about to die, he's getting angry. So he's not just mocking him for the sake of him mocking, but he's getting angry and saying, Jesus, if you're really who you say you are, then why don't you hurry up and get us both out of this? And we even talked about this last week. How it's so easy for us, right, sometimes to get angry at the Lord when he doesn't do something we thought he should have done. It's so easy to say, you know what, my Jesus wouldn't have done that. He would have answered that prayer. He would have protected us from this. He wouldn't have let this harm come our way. He would have healed her. He would have helped out with this. He would have done that. And how easy it is for our heart to get so cold to God. But yet we don't see all of the people there that day shouting and saying, if you're really God, save yourself. We see the last person, don't we? He kind of speaks up and says, no, don't you fear God? He looks at the other criminal and says, don't you fear God? Because we're getting what we deserve. I mean, we don't know what they did that day. We don't know what the criminals had done. We just know that they're criminals, right? Some English translations of the Bible said it called them thieves, but we still don't know quite the degree of what their crime was. But it was severe enough to get them this punishment. And this was not tossed out to just everybody. Being crucified was a Roman execution. It was the way that the Roman government executed their worst offenders. And so this man speaks up and says, yeah, he didn't do anything. You and I are getting what we deserve. And then he looks at Jesus and he says, Jesus, would you remember me? Would you remember me when you go into your kingdom? Remember when I was in college, I had a good friend who was an extremely talented musician. I mean, the guy had incredible skill. I mean, some of the best I'd ever seen or heard. And I remember I joked with him. I said, you know what? Don't forget us little guys when you make it big someday. All right? Don't forget. Remember us less important people when you're Mr. Big Shot. Okay? And in this moment, the guy just simply says, Jesus, would you not forget about me? I know who I am. I know what I've done. I know who I am in light of who you are. But would you not forget about me? And Jesus just looks at him. And he says, you know what? Today you'll be with me in paradise. And what's beautiful, this one's so beautiful, is that the word there for paradise is actually a word that creates this image of a garden. And Jesus kind of uses it. There's some other parts of Scripture that kind of refer to the Garden of Eden right before the fall. And so he uses this intentionally to portray peace and rest. Just he says, today you'll be with me in paradise. You'll be with me in heaven. And in this moment, we see such a basic, elementary reality of this moment. But again, it's so easy for the elementary things to become tasteless for us because we've heard it enough times, we know all this stuff, we just brush it off. We see that Jesus didn't come just to save himself, but to provide a way for the world to be saved and reconciled to God. And again, we know this. This is nothing new. We know this. We know this reality of, yes, we're saved because we believe in Christ. And we use this language a lot as people who've grown up in church. We use these words of, yes, I'm saved. Yes, I believe in God and I go to church. I try to be a nice person, all these things. I'm a Christian. We use these words often because we learned them growing up in Sunday school as kids, and we learned them through all of our years of gathering and celebrating Easter and other times throughout the years. We've gathered as a people of God, and we've worshiped and we've leaned into the Word of God. We have heard this, but it's become so tasteless because our heart, listen, our heart has forgotten who we were in relation to Christ. And this sounds so basic, so simple. But I worry that as we gather for Easter and as we gather and lean and look to the cross, we forget the richness and the privilege in the undeserving emotion that overwhelms us, that Christ died for me and that he loves me. For a lot of us, we've just kind of kept it around. Those of you who know me know that I grew up in Michigan, and I remember hearing this story. It was big. It was a big local story right before we moved to South Carolina, and this gentleman had bought a bunch of farmland back in the 80s, and he bought it from the guy who had owned it for forever. And when back in the 80s, when he was touring the property and seeing parts of it, they came across this big old rock on the ground, and the guy said, "Yeah, that's a meteor right there." And he's like, "Yeah, when pigs fly, sure, you crazy old man. I'm sure it's a meteor. Sure, it's just a cool looking old rock." And well, he bought the property, and he liked how the rock looked, so he picked it up and he put it on his front porch, and he used it to prop open the door, because throughout the summers in Michigan, the cool breeze would flow right in through the windows and right into the house and just kind of bring this fresh sense into the air. And so he'd use it in his front porch to prop open the door. But back about a dozen years ago or so, the man ran into some hard times, and he had some bills that were owed that he couldn't pay for. And so he ran into some things, and so he became desperate. He said, "You know what? Maybe that crazy old man was right." And so he grabs that rock. He says, "Listen, people are going to laugh at me about this." And he brings it to a geologist down in one of our universities in Michigan, and he brings it for them to be inspected. And they find out that it's actually one of the largest meteors ever found in Michigan, and that it is worth $250,000. And he was using it to prop open his door. For so many of us, when we think of our salvation, the privilege of us getting to know Christ, we keep it around like a keychain on our pocket. Keep it around like a big old rock that looks nice that sits on our front porch, but to me, it really doesn't have much value. I'm going to do my life. I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to keep on doing what I want to do. But yeah, I'll go to church on Easter. I'll go to church sometimes throughout the year. Yeah, sure, I'll be a nice and kind person, because that's what Christians do, right? That we're friendly people. We smile a lot, all those things. And so we do all this stuff, and we look nice, but really this reality of us belonging to Christ and being saved and following Jesus doesn't carry a whole lot of weight in our soul. And so I believe for some of us, there's this essence of needing to pull the plug in some ways and drain out some of the stuff that we've been carrying around for quite a while of what it means to follow Christ. Because for some of us, we've grown up in church and we've heard the stories, right? We've heard the stories of the people who had these radical transformations. We've heard the story of the drug dealer. We hear the story of this guy or that guy who turned around for Christ. And so we always compare ourselves, and we always think, you know what? I don't have that kind of story. Especially if we grow up in church, we always we know, right? We say we know what it looks like to follow God, what it looks like to live by the rules. Because we were taught it. We were taught it, and we learned it. So we grew up with parents or grandparents who kind of ingrained us with so much of this stuff. So we know what it looks like to walk with God, to be a Christian. But our heart hasn't caught up. And so for so many years, our heart has been playing catch up in some ways, and we've had this immense sense of guilt, this immense sense of, you know what, I'm afraid of all of that. I'm afraid of this ladder. I'm afraid of all of these rules. I'm afraid of what God is going to tell me to give up. I'm afraid of all of this stuff. I'm afraid of disappointing God. Because I'm not going to measure up. I'm not going to be like him or her. I'm not going to be that. And so without even trying to really lean in to really know the Lord, we decided just kind of sit back. And so we allow that thinking, that belief to kind of fill us up, and it controls us. And I love just to poke a hole and let it all drain out. Because I've met so many people as a pastor who have all of their own ideas keeping them from God, and all of it, the veil was torn. The veil was torn. We look at ourselves and we say, you know, I'll never be good enough. I'll never be able to right my wrongs. I've got too many skeletons in the closet. And we forget that the criminal never jumped off the cross to do some good deeds. We forget the criminal never had this deep understanding, this deep sense of theology and knowing of the Bible and all this stuff, right? That the criminal simply, in his last moment, said, God, I realize that I've got all these skeletons. I realize that I've wronged all of this. Would you forgive me? Would you not forget about me? Would you remember me? And so I feel like there's all of this distance between us and God. I remember having breakfast with a gentleman one day, and he just shared, you know, I feel like I'm a million miles away. And I just said, yeah, you think that, but God's actually right around the corner. We can take a million wrong turns and still only be one right turn away from God. That's the beauty of what he has done for us and how he cares for us. And so there are all these things that consume us and fill us, these lies that we believe that hold us back. And I love for us to brush them off and see taste. Listen, I'd love to see taste brought back to our walk with God. I'd love for us to cry again when we think about how much he loves us. For some in the room, we feel like we've been walking with God for a while, and so this message on Easter is nothing new, but when is the last time our heart just sank because we were so grateful? I've noticed that as we grow in our years, we also grow in this essence of self-preservation. And we think, God, I don't really need you as much now. We don't say it. Maybe we don't even think it, but we live it. I needed you when I was a teenager. I need you when I was in my 20s, maybe a little bit in my 30s. Now I'm married, got my kids. I'm a grandparent now. I've been to church a lot. I know the Bible pretty well. God, I don't really need you as much as I did back then. I'm okay now. And we forget that it's the criminal who is undeserving, who is unworthy, who had a heart full of humility, that got to walk into paradise with our King. And yes, it is the heart of humility when we recognize our sin, we recognize our past, that begins this relationship with Christ, but it is that same heart that maintains it. And the reality is that God doesn't want us to wait until our final day. He doesn't want us to wait to the end. Why would we wait when we've got right in front of us, we got in our pocket $250,000 rock? Why would we wait? Why would we wait to say, Lord, I'm all in for you. I belong to you now. Why would we wait? A beautiful reality is that being saved is not just some sort of membership ticket that we have, that we get, that we kind of claim when we pass away and go into heaven. No, paradise in some ways begins now. As the great theological band Guns N' Roses shared, they say that every rose has its thorns. In this world that we live in, the garden around us, as we begin to follow Christ, he begins to bloom parts of our life as we follow him. But there are still some thorns. There are still hardships. There are still bad days. There are still terrible agonies that we experience, all this stuff. But there's a beauty that we have that we would not have had if it wasn't for Christ. And when we do take our last breath, and we do step into eternity, and we spend the rest of our existence with God, then we realize how wonderful it is to have a beautiful garden that doesn't have any thorns. So friends, I don't know where you are with God, but I urge you, what has filled you that is keeping you from being filled with the Lord? What is holding your heart back from recognizing, God, you know what, I really need you. I've tried it my way for a long time, but I'm ready to try your way. What is keeping you? What is the wall that stands in front of you? Because our King put a door in the wall for us to know him. Listen, not just know about him, but to know him as a friend. So friends, I urge you, as a fellow individual looking to love the Lord more and more every day, who's not perfect, but simply wants to love Jesus and love his wife and love his kids and love the community around him. Listen, I urge you to be hungry again, to be grateful again.